My son and his wife made me eat a cold sandwich in the back of my own car with their dog, while they dined at a five-star restaurant. They said it would be too stressful for an old woman like me. They thought I was a helpless fool they could just set aside. They didn't know that one day they would be the ones begging me to save them and I would get to return the favor. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Lenora Fields, and at 72, I have learned that the cruelest words are often delivered with a smile, wrapped in the guise of love. For 30 years I worked as a school administrator, a job that required patience, precision, and the ability to see through the flimsy excuses of wayward teenagers. I thought this had prepared me for anything. I was wrong. It had not prepared me for my own son Dennis and his wife Kimberly. After my husband Charles passed away, the silence in our comfortable two-story house on Chestnut Street was a heavy blanket. Dennis, my only child, had been my rock then, his grief a mirror of my own. But in the 5 years since he married Kimberly, a woman whose ambition was as sharp and as cold as her designer stilettos, my son had become a stranger to me. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a weary anxiety, the easy laughter by a constant low-level stress that seemed to hum just beneath his skin. They lived a life I didn't recognize, one fueled by credit cards and the desperate need to project an image of success that always seemed just beyond their financial grasp. Their visits to my home became less about family connection and more about assessment. Kimberly's eyes would sweep over my sturdy, well-loved furniture, the pieces Charles and I had saved for years to buy, and I'd hear her mutter to Dennis about how a modern minimalist aesthetic would do wonders for the resale value. My role in their life had been subtly but surely redefined. I was no longer the matriarch. I was a resource and, increasingly, an obstacle. My quiet, frugal ways were an embarrassment to Kimberly's aspirational lifestyle. My simple, home-cooked meals were a pale imitation of the trendy, overpriced restaurants she preferred. They began to manage me, always, of course, for my own good. "Mom, you really shouldn't be climbing that ladder to clean the gutters," Dennis would say, his voice laced with a concern that sounded rehearsed. "You could fall. Let us hire someone." The bill, I knew, would be another strain on their already stretched budget, another reason for their resentful sighs. "Lenora, darling," Kimberly would chime in, her smile never quite reaching her eyes, "we've arranged for a car service to take you to your church group on Wednesdays. It's not safe for you to be driving at night anymore." My weekly drive to see my friends, a small bastion of my independence, was suddenly deemed a reckless act. They chipped away at my autonomy, piece by painstaking piece, their every act of control wrapped in the suffocating blanket of their supposed love. I found myself agreeing, acquiescing, not because I believed them, but because arguing was exhausting, and the thought of alienating my only son, of losing him completely, was a fear that kept me silent, compliant. I knew they were struggling financially. I'd overhear hushed, frantic phone calls Dennis would have in the other room, his voice tight with stress as he spoke to credit card companies or the bank. Kimberly's lavish spending never ceased, each new designer handbag, each weekend getaway, another stone in the wall being built between their world and mine. I had my own comfortable pension, my own savings, but they never asked for help directly. Their pride, or perhaps their strategy, was more insidious. They didn't want a handout. They wanted control of the assets they believed were their birthright, starting with my home. The house on Chestnut Street was my sanctuary. It was where I had raised Dennis, where I had loved Charles, where every corner held a memory. To them it was just real estate, an undervalued asset waiting to be liquidated. I felt like a quiet, stubborn ghost, haunting the rooms they were already mentally redecorating, a silent guardian of a past they were eager to erase. The tension culminated in the week of Dennis's promotion. He'd been made a regional manager at his firm, a significant achievement, and Kimberly insisted on a celebratory dinner. Not a family meal at my home, of course, but a reservation at Aria, the city's newest, most ridiculously expensive restaurant, a place where a single entree cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "You have to come, Mom," Dennis had insisted. "It's important. All the senior partners will be there. We need to present a united family front." A united family front. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. But I agreed. For him. For his career. I pressed my best silk blouse, polished my sensible leather shoes, and prepared myself for an evening of polite smiles and quiet endurance. I had no idea that their idea of a united front did not include me at their table. I thought I was being prepared for a celebration. I was, in fact, being prepared for my most profound and public humiliation yet. The evening of the celebratory dinner, I was ready and waiting in my living room a full 30 minutes before Dennis and Kimberly were due to arrive. I had taken extra care with my appearance, wanting, for my son's sake, to look presentable, to not be the dowdy old woman I knew Kimberly saw me as. My silk blouse was crisp, my pearls, a gift from my late Charles, were clasped neatly around my neck. I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Perhaps this evening, this celebration of Dennis's success, could be a turning point, a return to some semblance of the warm, loving family we once were. When they arrived, my hopes began to crumble. Kimberly swept in, a vision in a sleek black dress, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of my appearance before she offered a brittle, "You look nice, Lenora." Dennis, looking stressed and distracted in a new suit, just mumbled, "Ready to go, Mom? The reservation is for 7:30. There was another surprise waiting for me at the curb. "We'll take the Lexus, Mom," Dennis announced, gesturing towards his gleaming, far too expensive car parked behind my own modest sedan. "It makes a better impression." His words were a casual dismissal of my car, and by extension, my entire life of sensible, unflashy choices. We drove to the restaurant, the silence in the car thick with unspoken tensions, Kimberly tapping away on her phone, Dennis navigating downtown traffic with an impatient, jerky rhythm. Arya was even more opulent than I had imagined. A valet whisked the Lexus away. The entrance was all glass and chrome, a doorman in a top hat bowing slightly as we entered. The restaurant itself was a hushed cathedral of fine dining, the tables spaced far apart, the clientele a sea of expensive suits and glittering jewelry. It was a world away from my quiet life on Chestnut Street. We approached the hostess stand, a sleek podium manned by a willowy young woman. "Reservation for Fields, party of 3, Dennis said, his voice full of a confidence he didn't seem to possess when he was speaking to his creditors on the phone. The hostess smiled. "Of course, Mr. Fields. Your table is ready." She picked up 3 menus. But Kimberly placed a perfectly manicured hand on the hostess's arm, stopping her. She turned to me, her face a mask of patronizing concern. "Lenora, darling," she began, her voice a low, confidential murmur, though I knew the people at the next table could likely hear every word. "Look at this place. So intense. The noise, the people, it's all very overwhelming. You look a little pale. I'm worried this might be too much for you." I stared at her, my heart beginning to pound. "I'm perfectly fine, Kimberly," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I know you think you are, dear," she continued smoothly, patting my arm as if I were a frightened child. "But Dennis and I would never forgive ourselves if you had a turn or felt uncomfortable. You know how you get in loud, crowded places. It's for your own good, really." She turned to Dennis, a silent command in her eyes. My son, my own flesh and blood, cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "She's right, Mom. It's really loud in here. And stuffy. You'd be much more comfortable getting some fresh air." Then came the final devastating blow, delivered with the casual cruelty that had become Kimberly's trademark. She opened her ridiculously expensive handbag and produced a small wax paper-wrapped packet. A sandwich. It looked like the sad leftover turkey from last Sunday's dinner. "Here," she said, pressing it into my hand. "I made you a little something before we left. You can just wait in the car. It's a lovely evening. You can listen to the radio. Fluffy will keep you company." Fluffy. Their yapping, pampered little poodle, currently yipping from inside her designer carrier at Kimberly's feet. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing wave that threatened to suffocate me. They were not just excluding me, they were demoting me, dehumanizing me. They were sending me, their mother, to eat a leftover sandwich in the back of my own car with their dog, while they went inside to dine on lobster and champagne. All for my own good. The hostess looked on, her professional smile frozen in an expression of horrified pity. A man at a nearby table who had been watching the entire exchange, quickly looked away, a flush of embarrassment on his face. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was too stunned, too wounded for that. A cold, profound numbness settled over me. I looked at my son, searching his face for any flicker of love, of shame, of shared memory. I found none. Only a weak, cowardly desire to appease his monstrous wife. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the sad little sandwich clutched in my hand. The doorman, his face a mask of professional indifference, held the door for me. I sat in the back seat of my own car in the valet lane, the engine off, the lights of the city blurring through the tears that now streamed silently down my face. A few minutes later, a valet brought out Fluffy in his carrier and placed him on the seat beside me. "Your son said to make sure you had some company, ma'am," he said, trying to be kind. I sat there in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the restaurant, the place where my son was celebrating his success. I unwrapped the sandwich. It was indeed dry turkey. Fluffy looked up at me, his little tail giving a hopeful wag. I broke off a piece and gave it to him. We ate our dinner together in silence. The outcast mother and the pampered poodle waiting in the car for our own good. The drive home from the restaurant was a silent, one-sided affair. I sat in the back of the Lexus, a ghost in the plush leather seat, while Dennis and Kimberly in the front chattered brightly about the evening. They spoke of the wine, the food, the important people Dennis had networked with. They did not speak of me. It was as if the humiliating incident in the lobby, my lonely dinner in the parking lot with their dog, had never happened. Or worse, as if it was so insignificant, so normal that it required no comment. Their casual erasure of my pain was, in its own way, more cruel than the initial act itself. When we arrived back at my house, they walked me to the door with the same feigned concern they had shown all evening. "You see, Mom," Dennis said, his voice full of a forced cheerfulness. "Wasn't that better? You got to rest and we had a productive evening." I didn't answer. I simply took my keys, walked into my empty house and closed the door on their smiling, deceitful faces. The silence that greeted me was no longer a comfort. It was a void. The house felt vast, cold, a museum of a life that was no longer mine. I didn't sleep that night. My mind, usually a quiet, orderly place, was a raging torrent of images and words. Kimberly's condescending smile. Dennis's averted gaze. The pitying look on the hostess's face. The feel of that sad, dry turkey sandwich in my hands. The phrase, their new favorite weapon against me, echoed in my head. "It's for your own good." They had used my love, my desire to keep the peace, my quiet dignity as tools to manage me, to marginalize me, to make me smaller and smaller until I finally disappeared. The years of subtle slights, of helpful suggestions that were really commands, of their growing entitlement, it all coalesced into this one unbearable act of public degradation. My heartbreak, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to burn away, leaving behind a core of something I hadn't felt with such intensity in a very long time. A cold, clear, unyielding anger. Not a hot, shouting anger like Dennis might display, but a quiet, patient, and far more dangerous fury. The fury of a woman who has been pushed past her breaking point, a woman with nothing left to lose. They thought I was a frail, helpless old woman. They saw me as a problem to be managed, a resource to be tolerated until they could get their hands on my assets. They had forgotten that I had been a school administrator for 30 years, a job that required not just compassion, but a sharp mind, a steel spine, and the ability to navigate complex systems and even more complex human beings. I would not let them win. I would not let them reduce me to a forgotten footnote in my own life story. But I knew that an emotional confrontation would be useless. They would just dismiss me as hysterical, as not herself. No. My response had to be as cold, as calculated as their own cruelty. It had to hit them where they lived, where they were most vulnerable, their precarious, image-obsessed financial lives. The first hint of how I might do that came a few weeks later. I had become a more quiet, more distant observer in their lives, my compliance now a strategic camouflage. They mistook my withdrawal for defeated resignation. One evening, Dennis was at my house ostensibly to fix a wobbly railing on my porch. He was on his phone, his back to me, his voice a low, frantic whisper. He thought I was in the kitchen, but I was standing silently in the hallway listening. "I don't know what you want me to do," he was hissing into the phone. "The interest rate just adjusted, the payment is going to be almost double. No, the bank won't refinance, not with our credit score. We're looking at a balloon payment in 6 months, and if we can't make it, I don't know. We could lose everything." He hung up, his face pale with a sweat I recognized as pure fear. Their mortgage. The one on their trendy, over-leveraged house in the suburbs. It was in trouble. Serious trouble. I filed that crucial piece of information away, a small, hard diamond of knowledge in the vault of my mind. For years, they had worried about what would happen to them when something happens to Mom. They had it all wrong. The real question was, what was going to happen to them now that something had finally, truly happened to Mom? The quiet, accommodating mother they knew was gone. In her place was a woman with a purpose. A woman who had just overheard the first clue to her own liberation, and to their spectacular, well-deserved downfall. The 6 months that followed my discovery of Dennis and Kimberly's mortgage trouble were a masterclass in quiet, patient observation. I became a ghost in their lives, a polite, distant presence. I stopped offering to host Sunday dinners. I no longer called to check in. My withdrawal, which they had once so desperately craved, now seemed to unnerve them. They had wanted me out of their way, but my sudden, complete emotional absence left a void they hadn't anticipated. They had grown accustomed to my love, my support as a given, a constant backdrop to their self-absorbed lives. Now that it was gone, they seemed a little lost, a little adrift. Their financial situation, I could tell, was deteriorating rapidly. The frantic, whispered phone calls from Dennis became more frequent. Kimberly, in a move of stunning hypocrisy, began to complain to me about the outrageous cost of living, and how they were barely scraping by. She did this, of course, while wearing a new designer handbag, but the desperation in her eyes was real. They were drowning in debt, the balloon payment on their mortgage looming like a guillotine. I listened with a polite, detached sympathy, offering no solutions, no offers of financial aid. I was no longer their safety net. My, for your own good moment was coming, and I intended to savor it. The inevitable plea arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. They came to my house together, a united front of manufactured charm and desperate hope. They brought a peace offering, an ridiculously expensive orchid, the kind Kimberly loved but I had always found fussy and cold. They sat on my sofa, their smiles bright and brittle. They made small talk, asking about my health, my garden club, their voices full of a solicitous concern that was almost comical in its insincerity. I let them perform, sipping my tea, waiting for the real reason for their visit. It finally came after 20 minutes of excruciatingly awkward pleasantries. "Mom," Dennis began, leaning forward, his hands clasped nervously between his knees. "Kimberly and I, we're in a bit of a bind. A serious one." "Oh," I said, my voice a model of mild, grandmotherly interest. "It's the house," he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of rehearsed panic. "The bank, the interest rate adjusted, and there's a massive balloon payment due. If we can't refinance or pay it down, Mom, we're going to lose our home. We could be foreclosed on. Homeless. Homeless." The word hung in the air, thick with a delicious, unspoken irony. The same fate they had so casually consigned me to, in spirit if not in fact, when they made me eat my sad little sandwich in the car. Kimberly, seeing her cue, chimed in, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "Oh, Lenora," she wept, "it would be a disaster. For us. The shame of it. We don't know what to do. We've tried everywhere, but our credit, it's just not good enough for a new loan." She looked at me then, her face a mask of desperate hope. "You are our only hope, Lenora. We were thinking, a loan? From your retirement savings? Just to help us save our home. To keep our family together. You wouldn't want to see your own son and his wife become homeless, would you, Mom? We're family. Family." The word from their lips was an obscenity. The hypocrisy of it, the sheer, breathtaking audacity to appeal to the very familial bond they had so thoroughly, so publicly desecrated, almost made me laugh. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm, their carefully constructed performance crumbling under the weight of my quiet, unwavering gaze. "Alone," I said finally, my voice soft, contemplative. "A rather significant one, I imagine." "Yes," Dennis said quickly, seizing on what he thought was a flicker of acquiescence. "But we'd pay you back. With interest. Of course." I stood up and walked to my writing desk, my back to them. I could feel their hopeful, greedy eyes on me. They thought I was going to my checkbook. They thought their little performance had worked, that their poor old mother would once again ride to their rescue, her own past humiliation forgotten in the face of their present crisis. But I wasn't reaching for my checkbook. I was reaching for a folder my lawyer had helped me prepare weeks ago for this very eventuality. I turned back to them, a different kind of document in my hand. I have been thinking a great deal about your financial situation, children, I said, my voice now devoid of its grandmotherly softness, replaced by something they had never heard from me before, the cool, crisp authority of a banker about to foreclose. And I agree. Something must be done. I sat back down, placing the folder on the coffee table. I can't just give you the money, I said, my eyes meeting theirs, a slow, cold smile touching my lips. But I will help you save your home. They leaned forward, their faces alight with a triumphant, avaricious glee. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated their simple old mother, one last time. They had no idea that they hadn't just come to me begging for a loan. They had just walked willingly into my carefully laid trap. The triumphant glee on my son's face was a painful yet satisfying thing to behold. He and Kimberly exchanged a quick conspiratorial glance, a look that said, she's falling for it. The old woman is going to bail us out again. Their arrogance, their underestimation of me had always been their greatest weakness. Today it would be their undoing. Oh, Mom, thank you. Dennis gushed, his relief so palpable it was almost a stench in my quiet living room. We knew you'd understand. We knew you wouldn't let us lose the house. I would never let the family home be lost, I replied, my voice holding a double meaning that soared right over their heads. The question is how best to secure it. I opened the folder my lawyer had prepared. A simple loan, as you've suggested, is a messy affair. It can create tension in families. I believe a more professional arrangement is in order. I explained my solution. It was a plan of beautiful, vicious simplicity, one that my lawyer, Ms. Albright, had drafted with a certain predatory delight. I would not give them a loan. Instead, I would use a significant portion of my retirement savings to quietly purchase their mortgage note directly from the bank. I will become your lender, I explained, my tone as calm and as reasonable as if I were discussing the weather. The bank gets their money, the threat of foreclosure is gone, and the loan stays within the family. I can even, perhaps, I added, a magnanimous flourish, offer you slightly better terms than the bank would on a new refinancing agreement. It's a win-win for everyone. They were stunned into silence, not by any suspicion, but by the sheer, unexpected brilliance of the idea from their simple old mother. They hadn't considered it. It was a move beyond their limited, desperate thinking. You can do that? Dennis stammered. With the right capital, yes, I said coolly. And I have been more prudent with my savings than you have been with yours. Kimberly, her sharp mind already calculating the benefits, leaned forward. So, you'd own the mortgage? We just pay you every month instead of the bank. A look of greedy relief washed over her face. An old woman, she was likely thinking, would be a much more lenient, more easily manipulated creditor than a faceless financial institution. A late payment here, a sob story there. They could probably stretch the terms for years. Precisely, I said, meeting her gaze. It keeps the house safe, it solves your immediate crisis, and it keeps our financial matters private within the family. They were ecstatic. They fell over themselves with gratitude, with promises of repayment, with declarations of my brilliance and my generosity. It was a nauseating performance, but I endured it with a serene smile. They were so blinded by their desperation and their own perceived cleverness in having secured a bailout that they didn't bother to read the fine print. They didn't question the terms of the new loan agreement Ms. Albright had so expertly drafted, the one I had them sign right there at my dining room table. The agreement they so eagerly signed, the one that transferred their massive debt from the bank to me, was a masterpiece of legal artistry. It contained all the standard clauses, of course. But it also contained a few special additions, buried deep in the legal jargon they were too arrogant or too lazy to read. A clause that waived the standard 10-day grace period for late payments. A clause that outlined draconian, compounding daily interest penalties for any and all arrears. And most beautifully, a clause that gave me, the new lender, the right to call the entire loan due, a balloon payment for the full remaining amount, at my discretion with only 90 days' notice, should they default on any single term of the agreement. They signed it without a second thought, their signatures a triumphant scrawl. They thought they had just secured their future. They thought they had just manipulated me into becoming their personal, lenient bank. They had, in fact, just handed me the keys to their financial prison. They had willingly, eagerly placed their heads in the noose and then handed me the rope. The process of buying the mortgage took a few weeks of quiet, efficient legal work by Ms. Albright's firm. Dennis and Kimberly, meanwhile, were back to their old arrogant selves, their relief making them even more insufferable. They threw a small lavish dinner party to celebrate dodging a bullet, to which of course I was not invited. I didn't mind. I was busy. I was busy becoming the master of their financial destiny. One Tuesday morning I received a call from Ms. Albright. "It's done, Lenora," she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "The transfer is complete. You are now officially the sole owner of the mortgage note on your son's home." I thanked her calmly, then hung up the phone. I walked to my window and looked out at the quiet street. My revenge was in place. It was silent, it was legal, it was absolute. And it was all their own doing. They had forced me to eat a cold sandwich in a car with a dog because it was for my own good. They were about to learn what it truly meant when I decided something was for theirs. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to make their first, inevitable mistake. The first month under our new family arrangement went smoothly. Dennis and Kimberly made their mortgage payment on time, the electronic transfer landing in my trust account with a quiet, satisfying ping. They were likely still celebrating their cleverness, their good fortune in having such a pliable, helpful mother. I, in turn, was the picture of quiet, grandmotherly benevolence. When they called, I was polite, distant. I did not mention their debt. I let them believe they had one, that everything was back to normal. The normality, as I knew it would, lasted precisely one payment cycle. On the 2nd of the next month, the payment had not arrived. My lawyer, Ms. Albright, had set up an alert system for me. The moment the deadline passed, my phone buzzed with a simple clinical notification: "Payment from D&K Fields overdue." A slow, cold smile touched my lips. I had wondered how long it would take. Their financial discipline had always been a house of cards, and the slightest breeze of inconvenience or a single extravagant purchase was enough to make it all tumble. The old bank would have waited, sent a polite reminder, offered a grace period. I was not the old bank. I was a woman who had eaten a dry turkey sandwich in a cold car while my son and his wife feasted on lobster. My capacity for grace, at least where they were concerned, had been utterly exhausted. That same afternoon, a courier was dispatched from Ms. Albright's office. He delivered a stark, legally binding notice of late payment and accrual of penalties to their trendy suburban home. The notice, drafted weeks ago and waiting for this very moment, outlined in cold, unforgiving detail Clause 14b of their loan agreement: the absence of a grace period and the immediate application of a substantial late fee, followed by a compounding daily interest penalty. Dennis's panicked phone call came less than an hour later. "Mom, what is this?" he shrieked, his voice a full octave higher than usual. "We got this insane letter from your lawyer. $100 a day penalty? That's criminal. We're 1 day late." "1 day?" "Yes," I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You are. And the terms of the agreement you signed are quite clear. I suggest you read them more carefully this time." But you're my mother," he sputtered. "You can't be serious. Just waive the fee. We'll pay you tomorrow, I swear." "I am perfectly serious, Dennis," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And I am not your mother in this matter. I am your creditor. And as your creditor, I expect the terms of our legally binding contract to be met. The late fee stands, and the daily interest is now accruing. I suggest you and Kimberly find a way to pay the full amount due, including penalties, as soon as possible." The cycle of their financial chaos, once a source of my own anxiety, now became the engine of my quiet, methodical revenge. They were late again the next month, this time by 3 days. Another notice. More fees. They were forced to cancel a planned weekend getaway. The month after that, a partial payment arrived. Another notice, this time more severe, detailing their breach of contract. Their lives, once a performance of effortless affluence, became a frantic, desperate scramble to make their monthly payment to me, the simple old woman they had so thoroughly disdained. Kimberly had to sell some of her designer handbags. Dennis was forced to trade in his flashy car for a more sensible and humiliatingly modest model. The final act came 6 months into my new role as their unforgiving landlord. They missed a full payment. Then they defaulted entirely. Ms. Albright sent the final notice. It cited Clause 22C of their agreement, the one giving me, the lender, the right to call the entire loan due in the event of a default. They had 90 days to produce the full remaining balance of their mortgage, a sum I knew they couldn't possibly conjure. That was when they appeared on my doorstep, not with threats or arrogance, but with the broken, desperate pleas of the truly defeated. They begged. They wept. They apologized, their words finally, perhaps, holding a shred of genuine remorse born of utter terror. They were going to lose their home. I sat them down in my living room, served them tea in my simple ceramic cups, and listened. When they were finished, I looked at my son, at the man he had become, then at the woman who had so eagerly helped him along that path. "You were so worried about me being embarrassed at that restaurant," I said calmly, my voice holding no malice, only a profound, weary sadness. "You said leaving me in the car with the dog was for my own good." "Well," I paused, letting my words settle in the quiet room, "I have come to believe that learning to live within your means, learning the true weight of your obligations, learning that actions have consequences, that is for your own good." "Mom, please," Dennis whispered, his face ashen. "Don't do this. Don't let them foreclose." "I am not letting them do anything, Dennis," I replied. "I am doing this. And I am not foreclosing. You have 90 days to list this house and sell it to pay off your debt to me. If it is not sold by then, I will take legal ownership. It is more grace than you ever showed me." I stood up, the conversation over. "I suggest you start packing." They left, two ghosts retreating into a future of their own making. They were forced to sell their perfect home in a down market, the proceeds barely covering their debt to me. They moved into a small, cramped rental apartment, the kind they had always looked down upon. My revenge was not loud. It was not fiery. It was the quiet, inexorable logic of a contract, the cold, hard math of consequences. And it was the profound peace I felt, knowing that the two people who had made me feel so small, so worthless, would now, for a very long time, have to think about me every single time they paid their rent, a constant, humbling reminder of the mother they had so foolishly, so catastrophically underestimated.